The thing I've been like working out in therapy is this idea of um, capitalism really bringing me down, and especially the role it has played in my life, the way economics have played out in my life, financial stuff. And I think that's been pretty disappointing for me. And I think that's why capitalism becomes this recurring dread that I find myself in. That sometimes is a rut that's super hard to get out of. And I've been seeing a lot of people on Twitter, um, talking about this idea of like healing in the USA and healing in traditional like Western modes of psychiatry and psychology. It really only goes so far because they're really just teaching you to like cope with capitalism, right? Like how to do your best in this thing that it takes as truth, in this system of capitalism that is taken as truth as something that's always going to be there. And so, I mean, accepted is basically the model, right? Um, and so I've been thinking about that, right? Like this idea of like I refuse to accept that. I feel like that would really crush me. Um, but what is I also wonder like what is that doing for me on a day to day? Or not even a day to day, but like when it gets me really down, like what is that really doing for me? Um, and so I guess there's those questions. But to get back to my family, um, I came up with this super quick summary to get at the zoomed out picture of what was happening in my house. And that is that my family was a low income immigrant family. My parents are from Mexico. And so my dad had to work to provide for our family. And because there were so many children, my mom had to stay home with them. And there's a lot of things to go in there that don't fit into this neat little summary. Um, but the neat summary is because we were a low income family, the dad had to work and mom stayed home with the children. And so time was pretty limited there with dad, with all the working. Um, but then two of my siblings, so there were five of us, two of my siblings are chronically ill. One is still chronically ill. The other one has received a lung transplant, so that's really great. But growing up, they were both chronically ill, and so mom then had to spend more time with the children who were sick, which meant time was even more limited. Um, and then one of my sisters was also having just a pretty difficult time. And I think at the time she was considered pretty rowdy, maybe disobedient. And so my mom was also spending a lot of time with her, maybe like trying to like rein her in, even though I don't, like that has definitely its own issues for sure. And so time was even more limited. And so it was just me and another sibling that were just kind of left, the middle children actually, who, who were just kind of there. And so time was just limited all the way around. And this isn't something well, I've healed, or I'm trying to heal. That's the thing. Like capitalism has really strained my relationship with my parents, but I'm trying to heal from this dynamic, because I understand that at the end of the day, like if my parents could have been there, they would have probably taken the option. And really, it's the unfortunate circumstance of capitalism that made time so scarce. The way time is a commodity and how we were simply poor and ill and couldn't afford it. See, that's the thing, poor and disabled in this country. Two of my siblings just like isn't gonna cut in. There were so many of us, so we were struggling. And so when I think of about that, right, how like so much of the struggles in my life and how like the rift between my parents and I is rooted in capitalism, is rooted in being poor and in living in a country where like health insurance is like debt, and um how my dad literally couldn't earn over a certain amount of money, over $30,000. Like he could not make more than $30,000 because otherwise we would not qualify for like health insurance, so that my sisters could afford their like medicine treatments, which is like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and their hospital stays, which are very frequent, which are also like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so like my family, all having been a low income family, was just never going to be able to afford that. And so my dad took like a pay cut essentially, um because he's a construction worker, which normally pays really well, but he couldn't legally make over $30,000, and so that's that's kind of what we were like living on in so many different ways, so we could have free health care. So that's just really fucked up, right? Like this thing that we, I don't know, it's just kind of like luck of the draw. Like it just so happened to be the case, um that my sisters were ill. um but it doesn't have to have been the case that my family was poor, or that being ill um paved a destiny for you, like of poverty or of struggle with like health insurance. Like that's actually just ridiculous. Like that part is not set in stone. And so that's something that really frustrates me, that my sisters were ill, and time was scarce because of like working already and capitalism. And so I just hate that capitalism like further cut up time and further put more obstacles in my life, and by virtue of like obstacles in my family that have an emotional impact, that have a psychological impact, right? That I'm now trying to heal from, still within capitalism, right? Still with a lot of input from these Western oh, what's the word? Well, whatever, Western psychology and psychiatry, basically. And so, I almost feel like I'm in a circle. Like, damn, like the constant is capitalism, but the thing is, it doesn't have to be like for it. It literally doesn't have to be. Like a better world is totally possible. But in the meantime, like it's causing so much harm, like so much damage that just kind of, um, what's it called? It ripples. It just ripples across, like from person to person. Um, like I just like emotionally, like materially, like everything. Like so much of my life has been determined by this dumb ass system. And so much of my hurt is routed around this dumbass system, right? That did my family, as it does literally so many families, the majority of families, dirty. Um, and that's just fucked up and makes me sad. Back when I was, I think, in early college, probably um, my sophomore year, I had this thought reflecting on myself and my friends, and how all of us at some point in our life had struggled, or were struggling with an eating disorder, um, and how all of us had issues with our moms, um, and none of us were white. So all of my friends, me and my friends all have eating disorders. Yeah. and and I found it very interesting that we all had issues with our moms, and that our moms specifically would like nitpick at our weight and the way we looked or how much we ate or didn't eat, just comments surrounding body image. And at the time, I didn't know um, the like medical and like academic information that I know now. But at the time, I found it really interesting, and I couldn't help feel that our moms were giving us eating disorders. Um, and I didn't ever say that explicitly because, like, my mom had always excused herself from our mental health. So basically, it was our choice, um, or it was our fault for caring, um, which, sucks. So because I had always, you know, preemptively understood that my mom was going to say, like, no, I didn't give you an eating disorder, it wasn't something that I voiced out loud. But there was this, like, link I saw between this with my, I don't know, it just seemed like there was something about having a non white mom and um, their children, their daughters, then getting eating disorders. Like, there just seemed to be like something about that. Um, and so then I eventually like learned some more reading just by virtue of the classes I was taking in education. And we learn about this concept of like intergenerational trauma, um, and this idea of adverse childhood experiences. And so I basically learned about trauma and how, contrary to how I was raised, trauma isn't this thing that you choose to have. You don't choose to be sad, to be upset, to be affected, to be triggered by something. You simply are. And I know that because, like, the way I like to put it to like other people is, if I had the ability to not feel this way, I would take that in a heartbeat, right? So, and I guess you have to trust when I say that, right? But I would, like, no one wants to feel this way. Like, I think we're all trying to do our best um, to manage what we're feeling, those of us who, like, struggle with, like, mental health stuff. And so I damn, I totally forgot what I was saying. So I learned that trauma isn't chosen, that in so many ways your body is just kind of using its fight or flight response, and kind of, doing its best to manage like the chaos around you or around me, I guess. I'm talking specifically about myself. And so that's kind of what I was like learning. These ideas of trauma, intergenerational trauma, um, and how this idea of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree like really started, like, I don't know, like started being less of an aphorism, I guess, if that's even like the right word. Um, and so because my mom actually like had an eating disorder growing up, um, and she was really scared that we would end up having eating disorders. And so she would criticize us when we were under eating. And then she would criticize us when we would overeat, which would cause under eating, and then so on and so forth. And so um, a lot of my other siblings also, like, struggle with their relationship with food, I would say, because that was so heavily monitored when we were growing up. Um, and that monitoring from my mom came from her having had an eating disorder as a kid or as a teenager, as a young woman. Um, and being scared that that would happen to us. And so she would watch so closely, so that her thinking that her watching so closely would mean that it wouldn't happen to us. Um, but the awful thing is that's exactly what it was kind of supporting, right? This idea of monitoring what you're eating is and controlling this controlling behavior of and her controlling behavior, right, of trying to control her fears by controlling her environment and controlling like our eating habits. And and so yeah, so learning kind of the linkages with that, right? So she struggled with something, and she wasn't able to heal, and so that fear um, kind of cropped back up, and it was unfortunately like um, passed down to us through unhealthy coping behaviors and an unhealthy relationship with food and body image. Um, and so that's something I've been thinking about, like how how so much of my like trauma is stemming from my parents' unresolved trauma. And the idea of like intergenerational trauma heals when someone finally decides, to take a step back and finally kind of like face um, and name and find the patterns to all of this hurt that has been carried and passed on. So that's been on my mind. How my mom gave me an eating disorder. Hashtag not clickbait. Um, but for real, I mean, and I haven't like talked in depth about this with my mom, but like now I wonder too, like what her mom's relationship was with like. Um, Actually, now that I think about it, like my mom's relationship with food probably came from them being like poor and like not probably having enough to eat and and that, right? And so this idea of like, and I would say her relationship with food now comes from this like abundance perspective of like I can't throw this food away. And so she like forces herself to like um or so she'll eat like more despite being full because she doesn't want to throw food away. And that's actually a behavior I've had to unlearn, um, because that was pretty harmful to me. Like I had a really difficult time with like overeating as well because I also felt guilty like throwing food away. Um, but now I understand that it's okay. Like it's really not worth the discomfort of like forcing myself to eat. So that's been really great. I'm really happy about that.